Hello, Howard. Good to see you again, and thank you for joining me again.
Julia, it's a pleasure.
So here, the idea is that we just continue the last conversation of a couple of weeks ago. And, I'd like to start with something that I had in mind to discuss, but I forgot to discuss, which is, in relation to the political part of the last conversation, the fact, for example, that you like Elon Musk, but do not like Donald Trump.
Right.
And so I look forward to hearing what you think real progressives, not fake progressives, but real progressives and Democrats, like the Democratic Party in the US and other democratic parties in the world, could do to build a culture able to do all the good things that we would like to do, like making humanity become a multiplanetary species and green the galaxy.
Right. Garden the solar system.
Without all things that are represented at this moment by Donald Trump.
Right.
You recommended that I read again The Genius of the Beast, which is one of your previous books. I had read it, but I have been going through it again. And I guess the message of the book is that democratic parties should embrace a principled and inspiring form of capitalism, like what is described in the book. So I'd like to know what is this form of capitalism and how it compares to capitalism as it exists today. And if you could elaborate a bit more.
Right. Well, the foundation of almost every idealistic movement on the face of the planet is wanting to lift the poor and the oppressed. And the system that has done it best is not the Muslim system. It is not the Marxist system. It is not even the Chinese system. It is the Western system. And the Western system consists of a triad of government, industry, and the protest industry. And those three things, this is like making bread. If you try to throw a whole bunch of flour on its own into a baking pan and put it in your oven, you're not going to get bread. You're going to get powder. If you try to put the yeast in your oven, you're not going to get bread. You're going to get crumbled, scorched yeast. If you put the water in your oven all by itself, all you'll do is make steam. But put the water with the flour and the yeast and put that in your oven and you get bread. And which goes back to something I wanted to discuss with you strangely about redoing mathematics. The math that we have today is profoundly primitive. It is primitive because it believes that 1 + 1 always equals 2. That's false. 1 + 1 always often equals 3. A larger whole with an identity of its own, with a power to make things happen of its own, emerges. A causal power of its own emerges. Just as putting the yeast together with the water and the flour makes something totally unexpected. You would never have water, which is a liquid, and yeast, which is it's a bacteria, or it's something very close to a bacteria. It's a colony of single-celled organisms. And from those descriptions, you could not possibly imagine bread. But when you put them together in the right way, whammo, you get what I call a material miracle, a supersized surprise. You get bread. This is a universe of recipes. It is not just a universe of lists of ingredients. And under the mandate of reductionist science, for the last 350 years, we've been putting together lists of ingredients. And we've been blind to the larger wholes that emerge from those ingredients. So we have to abandon the math of 1 plus 1 equal 2. Not abandon it, build upon it, build it in a new direction. And that new direction has to be a math that can account for and respect wholes, identities, things that larger properties that emerge when you put 3 quarks together and whammo, get something radically unexpected. You get a proton or a neutron, which cannot be in any way predicted by the mere qualities of quarks. You have to understand these wholes, these, I want to call them things like sentient beings, but they're not. Nonetheless, they are identities, and they make all the difference in the world. So what we're doing right now, this applies to politics, because there is no one ingredient solution to making the most fruitful system we can possibly imagine. A system that explores futures. What is this universe about, according to my books? It is a search engine. It is a search engine of possibility space. It is using us as fingers of its probe into the realm of the impossible. And what is our task? Wrestle the impossible into the realm of the ordinary. This cosmos has done this with us or without us. The way that it wrestled neutron and proton from a soup of ingredients, a soup of mere quarks. The way that it wrestled atoms together out of mere protons and electrons. And again, the recipe or the list of ingredients, add a proton to an electron, doesn't give you any sense of what the supersized surprise will be when you put them together. The supersized surprise you get will be hydrogen or helium and an atom. An atom is something so vastly new to a world of quarks or to a world rather of protons, electrons, and a few other particles in a plasma soup. An atom is something so totally unexpected that it utterly would blow your mind if you and I were there when these things came together. The same thing applies to putting the ingredients of government, the protest industry, and private, whatever you want to call it, private initiative together. We've got to get that balance together. We had it. We had the most soaring economy we've ever had under, of all people, Joe Biden. Timothy Ferris, the science author who put together the golden discs that went out into space on a Voyager. He put them together with, oh God, what is his name again? The scientist who used to say billions and billions of billions on PBS.
Carl Sagan?
Carl Sagan, yes. He put, and I should know that name because Lynn Margulis was one of my mentors in my second book, his first wife, and National Medal of Science winning biologist, and his son, Dorian Sagan, and I have worked together and actually created 2 books together. But nonetheless, Carl Sagan, I forget where I was going with Carl Sagan, but at any rate, the point is that you put the ingredients together and you get magic. So, it was Timothy Ferris. So Timothy Ferris put together the gold platter that went out on the Voyager. And Timothy Ferris has pointed out in one of his books on liberal capitalism, basically, or liberal democracies, that under the Democratic Party, the economy has always grown. Under the Republican Party, progress has slowed down. And that's when the Republican Party was merely conservative. Now it's not just merely conservative, it's dictatorial. It's supporting a man who wants to abolish the Constitution because he thinks he is the Constitution, and wants to abolish democracy because he thinks he is the people. I mean, why does he call the press the enemy of the people? Aside from getting that phrase from Adolf Hitler, whose work he read a great deal of. Because he is the people, and it's his enemy. That's what he's really complaining about. So the problem is that we're about to get this whole thing out of balance. And not only do we need this balance between the three mechanisms, the three separate ingredients of liberal capitalist democracy, we're destroying the global system. And the global system is incredibly important. Adam Smith had an amazingly important insight when he said that if Spain can produce wine more inexpensively than England, and England can produce wool more inexpensively than Spain, and England trades what it does well, wool, with the inexpensive wine of Spain, Spain and England prosper together. This is a cosmos of synergies. And synergies produce those magic ingredients, those supersized surprises, those larger wholes. And we are taking apart that which creates the larger whole and reducing it once again to its ingredients by taking apart the global system. We need people like Elon Musk, much as I loathe and despise the cruelty of what he did in Doge and the harm he did to the American system with what he did in Doge. The fact is, every once in a while, and a breakthrough maker, a new reality creator comes along. Thomas Edison was one of them. Henry Ford was one of them. And Elon Musk is one of them. And we need to incubate these great creators for all they are worth, because they are the indispensable seeds of advancement toward the ultimate goal, which is garden the solar system and green the galaxy. So the solution, I call it radical centrism. The solution is the middle path. Recognize that that conservatism and what we've always thought of as pro-democracy of the Democratic Party, they need each other. The conservatives cannot survive without the great visionaries who create new realities. Those great visionaries cannot survive without the petri dish in which they thrive, without the ingredients, the food base on which they thrive. It's the system that makes things work. And so that is the answer, radical centrism. And we've got to strip the disguise off of the crypto Marxists. They call themselves progressives. They are not. They are regressives. Why? Because they're Marxists in disguise. And their veil is thin, but effective. Very effective. And what's wrong with Marxism? Karl Marx says, go out and buy a book of 900 pages. Now, where is the value in the book? What are you actually paying for in the book is what value means, but he just sticks to this abstract concept of value. And he says the value is in the sweat labor. It's in the lumberjacks who cut down the trees. It's in the people in the paper mill who mashed those trees and flattened the mash and dried them and turned them into paper. It's in the work of the people who work the printing press, the inkers, and the people who stand there as the printing press churns out its product. It's in the work of the bookbinders who do sweat labor to produce the form we know as a book. What is he missing? There's one reason you would go out and buy 900 pages of mashed tree pulp with ink upon it. And it is not to have the ink And it is not to have the sheets of paper. And it is not to have that bulky thing that is bound together. The reason you buy it, which means real value, not Marxist value, is because Dostoevsky wrote it, or it's War and Peace, and the ingredients will change your life. You read it for a spiritual uplift. You read it for the knowledge it will pour into you. You read it for the thrill of immersing yourself in the world that the author has created. And what does Marx leave out as the value of the book? The work of the author. He leaves out the creative visionaries who give value to things by taking ingredients and making whole new magics, whole new equivalents to bread, from a set of not so simple ingredients. What authors like Dostoevsky or you or me, look at you. You go through so many books that it's unbelievable. You skim them to get the best out of them, but you go through them, Giulio, by the hundreds and thousands in order to extract their knowledge.
I think I have lost you for a while. Too bad, especially when you were complimenting me. Yeah, you have. Maybe I just didn't hear the last few seconds, and they will be in the recording anyway. Maybe it was my internet connection acting up, but just
says our
repeat.
internet connection is unstable.
Yeah.
But we'll just have to live with that because I've got dynamite. I've got the most amazing connectivity I've ever had in my life, thanks to fiber optics. So this, I can upload 2 hours worth of a video in 2 seconds with this connectivity. So there must be a stability in between us or something. But what I was saying is, you take this vast amount of knowledge, you take as much as your brain can handle and as much as your curiosity can drive you to. Why? To take it the way the baker takes it, as raw ingredients, to bake it and yeast it in your curiosity, to baste it in your curiosity, and to take from it something you hope will be a supersized surprise, a material miracle, a whole new way of seeing. So, and you and I, that's what we do. That's our life. That is our life. And in the capitalist system, we may not be wildly successful. I mean, Stephen King sells an awful lot more books, thousands more books than you or I will ever sell. But we are trying to make a contribution to this collaborative venture that goes back 10,000 generations of human culture. And we are doing our best. You know, there's a thing in nature called a stromatolite. A stromatolite, you find them off the coast of Australia. You can find remains of them in Michigan. And they look like the size of mattresses. And they're on a slender base, like a mushroom. And they are the creation of creatures so small, you can't even see them. These things are the size of your mattress. And they are so small, you can't, and they're made by collaborators. So small, you can't even see them. Those collaborators are bacterial colonies. And each bacterial colony goes through its process of eating the stuff that it loves, and it excretes stuff that's like sand, basically. It excretes minerals, and it deposits those minerals as a microscopically thin layer on what the layers that other generations have piled up so far. And its contribution can seem minuscule. It is literally microscopic. But take enough of those pileups of excreta, of mineral excreta, and what do you get? You get something 4 feet high. You get something the size of a bed. That's what you and I are trying to contribute to culture. And where does that fit into the mathematics of 1 + 1 does not equal just 2? 1 plus 1 can often equal 3 when it creates a whole new identity. We are doing what those bacteria in the stromatolite are doing. We are trying to leave a deposit that may seem microscopically thin, but over the course of time makes a contribution that allows new generations of visionaries like Elon Musk and Thomas Edison and Henry Ford to soar. That's our job.
And this was a very motivating point of view that made my day. Now, it's great that you use the expression radical centrism, because I have been using this expression myself, thinking that I invented it before finding out that many of the smartest people I know do use that expression. And I think radical centrism describes my own politics pretty well. Well, I've been shifting from left to right and from right to left many times, and doubtlessly I will have many of those shifts again. But radical centrism remains kind of a constant. Now, I would like to move to other things related to this 1 plus 1 doesn't always equal 2, but sometimes it equals 3. But before that, I have 2 questions regarding what you just said. One, among the list of ingredients for a healthy capitalist society, you mentioned the protest industry. Can you elaborate on that?
Okay. In 1848, there was a war. The United States inflicted a war on a party that didn't necessarily want to make war with it. It was Mexico. And the United States clobbered Mexico. And Mexico, by the way, was run by a relative of Napoleon at that point. So it wasn't what you would call an indigenous government. Nonetheless, it was a government based on military power. So nonetheless, it failed militarily. And the United States acquired all of our Southwest. It acquired Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, Colorado, and most important, California. There was a guy in Maine who was indulging himself in an experiment. His father was the owner of a pencil factory, and pencils were very important in the 1840s, and so his father made a fortune. And as the pampered son, he could afford experiments and lifestyles. So he built a cabin in the woods with his own hands, and he went there to spend a summer or an entire season in nature as he perceived it. Not that a hut made by human hands with human tools is nature. Whether it is or isn't something we can discuss later. One way or the other, he saw this war taking place, and he told the tax collector, I'm not paying my taxes because I'm objecting to this war. He helped invent the protest industry. He wasn't the first. In reality, the protest industry had arisen in England in the 1700s with England's objection to slavery. There was a great protest movement against slavery. One of the leaders of that protest movement is a man who wrote a song you've heard over and over again, Amazing Grace. He was a ship captain who transported slaves from Africa to the Americas, made a fortune that way, and but he was in a sailing ship. And he was caught in a storm at one point that threatened to destroy the sailing ship. And that is when he wrote Amazing Grace and suddenly made a turnaround in his life and became one of the first leaders of the protest industry, a leader of the anti-slavery movement. That anti-slavery movement had been successful in getting the British Parliament to outlaw slavery in England. by 1808. But when Henry David Thoreau, the man who was living at Walden Pond, the guy who had built his own hut and decided to stay there for a year or so, the son of the pencil maker, refused to pay his taxes. They came up with a name for this kind of protest. And suddenly the protest industry had a name. It had a vocabulary to work with. Human movements cannot survive unless they can verbalize themselves, unless they can come up with vocabularies. And the protest movement had grown so strong by the 1890s that there was an international group of organizations against imperialism in the 1890s. And they met internationally. Well, how did they pull that off? Through the fruits of capitalism, with using steamships and telegrams. In other words, without the base of modern capitalism, those protest industries could not have survived, and they could not have thrived. But they are a self-corrective mechanism in this threesome, this three-part system of government, industry, private initiative, and the protest industry. They provide necessary correctives. Look how the environmental movement, whose underlying assumptions I disagree with powerfully in this book, powerfully. Nonetheless, when I first came to New York City in 1964 from my hometown, Buffalo, New York, I wore white pants and white shirts. That was a problem because I was going to NYU on the Lower East Side, and by midday, there were horizontal creases I didn't even know existed in my clothes, and they were accumulating these black lines. And by the end of the day, they were gray, not white. Why? Because a short walk away from NYU were the Con Edison smokestacks on the river. Those smokestacks were 58 feet high, or they were huge, and they belched black smoke. Why? Because they were burning coal. Then the most unlikely character to participate in the advances of the protest industry came along. His name was Richard Nixon, man who was demonized for good reason at the time. And Richard Nixon established the Environmental Protection Agency to work on the problems that environmentalists had raised. Within a year or two, you could wear a white shirt in New York City. Why? Because the Con Ed was not, our electric company was not allowed to belch out black smoke anymore. They had to clean up their act, literally. The result was the stuff that accumulated on your clothing, if you tried to wear white, was also accumulating in your lungs. As a result of the EPA's cleanup, that stuff was not accumulating in your lungs anymore. You had a good shot of living a longer life. That was even more the case in LA, where LA was known for its incredible smog, big bowls of smog that would sit over the city for days, weeks, or months at a time, taking part of your life away by depositing poisonous things in your very lungs. The problem was biggest in London. When London would have bouts of smog, 2,000 people would die of this stuff. We cleaned this up. And we cleaned it up because of the protest industry, because of the environmentalists, even though some of the environmental assumptions at the very base of environmentalism are false or misguided. And that's covered in this book, because I'm trying to give you a whole new view of nature. In the case of the Sexual Cosmos, everything you know about nature is wrong, which is the book you can, I hope, see back there behind me somewhere. There it is.
We can do it.
So So that's where all of these things meet. The mathematics of the cosmos. Julia, you have been challenging me for the last month to articulate the new mathematics. And it finally came down today while I was walking around my 4 miles around the park, listening to your book, that A does not equal A, and 1 + 1 does not just equal 2, sometimes it equals 3. Those are the premises for the new mathematics. And by A does not equal A, I mean a star does not equal a star. A human does not equal a human. You and I are both humans. Fine, we could both be represented by A's, in which case we would make A equal A. But Julian, it's the differences between us that make us so rich. It's listening to your book and letting it force me to think that made me get back down to 1 + 1 sometimes equals 3, except that 3 is not even on the number line. It is, as my partner in crime, Eshel Ben Jacob, the head of the condensed matter physics department at the University of Tel Aviv, used to say, it's orthogonal to the number line. It can't even be described by simple numerals anymore. So yes, we need a new math. The book puts your book puts your nose against the fact, the irrational cosmos. It puts your nose up against the simple fact that math is still a profoundly primitive tool. And those who say that math is the universe, because math describes the universe, math is the universe, the whole universe is an equation. I forget his name over at MIT, who says this all the time. It's the basis of some of his books. They're crazy. This is, and you said it in your book.
That would be Sean Carroll by any chance?
No, it's not Sean Carroll. He's the criminal behind promoting the idea of entropy in our current culture. It's, oh God, I can't remember his name, but he's an astrophysicist at MIT, and he's made a good name for himself, but he's wrong. The universe is not math. Today, math is the equivalent of the Oldowan stone toolkit of 2.1 million years ago, or the even older stone toolkits of 3.1 million years ago. Yes, it can do things. Yes, it can do things that are important. Yes, it can underlie computer simulations, which are the greatest breakthrough right now in mathematics. Even more astonishing than cellular automata, which you discuss a lot in your book, and I still find a key to the mysteries of life or the universe. But the fact is, we only invented the equation in 1570, and it didn't catch on. It didn't catch on. We think the universe is equations. When Kepler was working out what we now call the 5 planetary laws, he didn't use equations to do it. He used geometry to do it. A mathematics of pictures for all practical purposes. A mathematics of ratios. And we'll get into ratios in a minute because it's at the heart of the irrational cosmos that you portray. What is reason to begin with? At any rate, Newton pulled off equational thinking, but he didn't have the equations that had been invented in 1570, over 100 years earlier. Those equations really didn't come into major play until after Newton, until the mid to late 1700s. And now we think that we used to think the universe was geometry. That's certainly what Galileo felt. He said that there was that nature was a book and that we could read it. How? With geometry. So back then, you would have said the universe is geometry. William Blake, when he was portraying God, portrayed God as having a calipers, a device, a compass, a device used in geometry. So God was the great geometer. When Newton was putting together his book, just like Galileo before him, he used the geometric form of reason, which is first lay out your axioms, then lay out your propositions, then try to prove your propositions using your axioms. And it was a perfect geometric structure that he was using in his Principia. But so when we think equations, which didn't really come into vogue until after Newton's death, are that they are that they are the universe. They don't just represent the universe. They are the universe. That's so stupid it is beyond belief. Look, we have a history, we humans, of inventing technologies, inventing something else, inventing the use of those technologies as metaphors, and then thinking our metaphors are reality. Once upon a time, the Babylonians were putting together their creation myth. And how did they imagine things were created? Well, their great technology, their breakthrough technology was the use of clay to make plates, to make pots, to make all cups, to make all kinds of things that hitherto had been done with basketware, which is not a very effective way to hold water, among other things. And you can't put it over your fire. So what did they imagine God did in creating the universe? Well, God created man out of mud, out of clay. And then when the clay person they'd created got lonely, God grabbed one of his ribs and made a woman. This was using the technology of the time, the highest technology of the time, to comprehend the universe. But did that mean the whole universe is clay? No, this was a metaphor. We invent a technology, then we use it as a metaphor, a secondary invention, the metaphor. We are doing the same thing today. One of the prominent technologies in your book is the idea that that the whole universe is a simulation. What a silly idea. That's as silly as reducing the cosmos to clay. And yet we have the arrogance to do it. And in the process, we do something that's highlighted in your book. Your book says very specifically that our mathematics is not rich enough to capture the richness of the universe. Not at all. Yes, it's come a long way from geometry. It's come a long way with the use of equations. But the big question, Giulio, is what's beyond the equation? Well, computer simulation may be beyond the equation. And then what's beyond computer simulation? And what's the 14 steps beyond that? In other words, our tools, our technologies will continue to evolve so long as we maintain that balance between the protest industry, private industry, and government. And if we manage to nurture Elon Musk's to come, then we will go 14 steps beyond the technology of our time. The people of, well, you have this brilliant insight in your previous book, and it's that someday our technologies will be so good that we will be able to go back in time. And those who come back to us, our own great-great-great-great-grandchildren who come back to us in time, may appear to us to be gods. So that I thought that was a brilliant idea, a really terrific idea. But the point is, we will keep technologizing. We are a technologizing species. We're not the first. Look at birds, they make nests. That's a technology. Look at termites. They make mounds that are the equivalent of 57 stories to 150 stories high compared to their body height. with complex, extremely complex architecture and with complex ventilating systems that allegedly control the CO2 level in the brood rooms of the queen. I mean, this is technology, but they are stuck with one technology. They do not do successive generations of technology. We do. And if this is a cosmos, and it is, that's a search engine of possibility space, constantly looking for the next level of the impossible to haul into the realm of reality, then we are the greatest probes of that possibility space that nature has so far conceived. And because nature is constantly in search of her next possibility, her next step up, we are vital to the universe. And having us not as a tribe of 5,000 or 50,000, but as a group of 8 billion, that's what makes us a collective brain that can produce new innovations, not just every 1,500 years, the way it was from the fall of the Roman Empire until the invention of the carriage in Britain, but every 15 years, as it was after 1800, with the telegram, the railroad, and later the invention of the telegraph, the typewriter, and the filing cabinet, which was an amazing invention. That was an information retrieval invention. Those things all happened in the 1800s. Roughly 1822, the railroad, roughly 1838, the telegraph, 1875, the telephone, 1875, the typewriter. And so now we don't just have technological advances every 15 years, which was a miracle in itself. We have technology advances every 5 years or less. And in the same way, working methodically at the mathematical system for those who are talented in it, we will have more advanced mathematics.
Before going back to 1 + 1 = 3, I want to just stay in the world of today's politics a couple more minutes and go back to what you said about the need to nurture the next 15 or 100 or 1,000 Elon Musk, which brings me back to the fact that our society today, and perhaps especially the kind of society that most people on the left seem to believe in, is not really able to produce this kind of superstars anymore. Now, I have been reading recently a very interesting book that is titled Abundance by Isaac Lane and Eric Thompson. That is, I mean, I found it a very interesting book, especially because it is written by left-wingers. It is written by liberals that support the Democratic Party in the US, while at the same time saying many of the same things that you hear conservatives say, but within a liberal framework. And reading the book, I was very much impressed because, you know, it reminds me of this other book that was called The Conservative Futurist, but the difference is that that one is written by a right-winger, this one is written by the left-winger, and both books say things that I very much resonate with. So I was wondering, reading the book, and I'd like to ask you the question of whether these ideas that sort of want to bridge left liberal and right conservative sensibilities could influence the future of, for the time being, the Democratic Party in the US, making it more responsive to the kind of beautiful building the future ideology that we believe in. today in the US and tomorrow in the rest of the world. I do look forward very much to seeing that happen, but I'm not too optimism seeing the recent evolution of the endless bitching debate between right and left wing. So I don't think it will happen, but I would like it to.
Well, here's an indication that it can happen. In 2005, I was dragged into the space movement by somebody from NASA and somebody from the National Science Foundation. I was dragged screaming and kicking. And now I run 3 space-oriented groups. One of them is a group that I put together about 7 years ago. It's called the $2 billion Moon Prize. And the members are myself, a Democrat, for a while, David Paterson, the former governor of New York State, a Democrat, the former head of the House Science Committee who wrote the Republican platform plank on space for Donald Trump just a year and a half ago, who is obviously a Republican.
That will be this 2025 project, part of that.
No, it's the we still call it the $2 billion Moon Prize project because that's what we started with, and we just don't
No, I mean this Republican is one of the author of this 2025 project.
No, not at all. But nonetheless, his partner, I mean, person in whose office he works and with whom he works every day, is Newt Gingrich, who also participated in this group. And a 3-star general, who generals are not allowed to declare a political affiliation, but believe me, he is MAGA as can possibly be, and I love him. And I love every member of this group. And I am a Democrat, period. And they are Republicans, as Republican as can be. And they are wonderful, creative people, and we have worked together successfully for 7 years. And one of the members of the group is now being rumored to be that he's considered for the next NASA administrator. We shall see.
Can I stop you one moment and go underline an important point? Then you continue. Now, you said that you are a Democrat.
Right.
You said that you love and admire at least one person who identifies as a Republican. But I'm sure you realize that from the point of view of many who call themselves Democrats today, the second thing that you said immediately disqualifies the first. And that from that point of view, this very thing you say disqualifies you from being able to call yourself a Democrat. I'm sure you realize that.
Well, I beg to disagree. Right now, the progressive wing, that is the crypto-Marxist wing of the Democratic Party, is trying to take over the whole party, which would mean excluding people like me. But we are the radical centrists, and we are the core of the traditional core of the Democratic Party. And it is by isolating themselves, making people like Zoran Mamdani, or whatever his name is, the new Democrat candidate for mayor of my city, New York City. New York City has the biggest Jewish population of any city outside of Israel. When Louis Farrakhan used to try to denigrate New York City, he'd call it Hebtown, or Hebrews, meaning Jews. And yet we have a Democratic candidate for mayor who is basically anti-Semitic and is anti-Zionist. And the whole Free Palestine movement, we could debate. It's insidious and it's genocidal. This movement managed to call the Jews genocidal because it is genocidal. It calls for the extermination of Jews. It calls for falling into line with what Muhammad said. because to be a Muslim means you must be faithful, loyal, and true to everything Muhammad said and everything Muhammad did. And he said, if a Jew falls into your hands, kill him. He said, the day of judgment will not come until every stone and tree stands up and says, there is a Jew behind me, kill him. In the stories of the battles of Muhammad taught to children, 4 of the 6 battles that are talked about are battles to destroy Jewish communities, to kill all the men, to torture them. God orders us to torture Jews. And that's been expanded today to mean that we Muslims should torture all of our enemies, all of, not just our enemies, all of the unbelievers. And then with these Jewish communities that Muhammad used to attack, he would starve them out. They offered a deal in one case. Muhammad offered this deal: kill your women, kill your children, come out, and we will spare you. And the Jews said, these are my precious ones. How can I possibly do that? And they came out and were beheaded. Every single male old enough to have pubic hair was beheaded in the town square. The process of beheading took all day long, and Muhammad sat there for every single beheading. And then the women were taken as sex slaves. This is what is legitimate in Islam. Momdani is not going to tell you that. And somehow we have ignored Islamic history as a major part of culture, of global culture, global history. We have ignored this. How could we possibly? Islam is the greatest imperialist movement ever to inflict itself upon the people of this planet. It is the Muslim Empire is the size of the British Empire at its peak, but the British only had their empire for roughly 300 years. The Muslims have had their empire for 1,400 years. That is a vast difference. And whereas the British have inflicted atrocities upon the people that they conquered, the Muslims have done something worse. Not only have they followed Muhammad's order of do not take prisoners, in other words, do not stop the war until thou hast made great slaughter in the land. Why? To terrify the few people who are left, so they will come crawling on their knees to you and will wrap their arms around your ankles and beg you, kissing your feet, to they will do anything as long as you leave them alive. They'll take on any religion you ask. They'll do anything. And that is useful because you need to install an Islamic order. You need to purge Jahiliyyah. Jahiliyyah is the ignorance, is the barbarism that precedes the arrival of Islam in a nation. In other words, under Muhammad, you were required to exterminate what we call the indigenous civilization and the indigenous religions. England had nothing near that. It didn't ask to exterminate almost exterminate the people utterly. It didn't take the women as sex slaves. It didn't try to exterminate the local religion. So there is this insidious force in the world that's been alive for 1,400 years that we would regard as very anti-human if we were allowed to know about it. But no, we are not allowed to talk about it, because the 56 nations of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which is the biggest intergovernmental body in the world outside of the United Nations, those 56 nations work together to police us, to get us to believe in a concept called Islamophobia. And I am here to say that I am a proud Islamophobe. We have good reason to be afraid of Islam. I mean, especially me as a Jew and as an atheist and as a scientific thinker, all of these things are against Islam. The only true science, according to Islam, is the science you can find in the Quran, the Hadith, and the Surah, and that you can then extrapolate on. Some of the greatest scientists alive today are Muslims, but they are working within the Western system. And we proved something in World War II. The Chinese and the Germans felt they were onto something, that racial purity is the key to becoming a Superman, and ruling all of the Untermenschen, the undermen. That did not prove to be true. I mean, if it had proven to be true, the Germans and Japanese would have won World War II. They lost. And they lost in particular, they lost to a coalition of nations. One of those nations was the greatest mongrel nation on earth, the United States of America. And in that war, we proved that a mongrel nation can outdo a nation of racial purity. What are we losing under Donald Trump, who is a racist par excellence, and who is trying to purge the culture? He's trying to purge us of racial impurity in a way that very much resembles the man he admires most. It's not Vladimir Putin, that's the living man he admires most, but his wife, Ivana Trump, in her depositions for the divorce proceedings against Donald Trump, said, "You think Donald doesn't read books? You're wrong. He keeps 2 books at his bedside table, and he reads one of them every night. Those 2 books are Mein Kampf by Adolf Hitler and the collected speeches of Adolf Hitler." So Trump is well schooled in the tricks of Adolf Hitler. Even the word fake news was his equivalent to the German term, Lügenpresse, which means the lying press. And he didn't come up with the term fake media, fake press, but he adopted it because it allowed him to do what Hitler had done with the press of Germany, decimating the mainstream press until finally, at last, he controlled all of the media. And today, Trump made a statement, and it's one of his many statements about needing to get rid of the news networks. Why? Because they're enemies of the people. They're fake media. And what does fake media mean? Doesn't agree with Donald Trump, criticizes Donald Trump. Donald Trump doesn't see the need for a protest industry. He wants us all to do what angels are supposed to do in heaven, sing the praises of Donald Trump all day. So we're up against a major problem in the United States, and the enemy is right in our White House right now. And the other enemy is Islam, because it's a 1300-year world war, and we don't recognize it.
This is all very interesting, especially because, as I was just thinking, my reading of Islam is not exactly the same as yours. I mean, we can discuss that another time, but I still think that besides some aspects of Islam that you have underlined, there are also other different aspects of Islam that one should underline. But without going into this discussion, which will take hours, now I don't entirely agree with what you said about Islam. Having said that, you would think, well, if I don't entirely agree with you on Islam, that should mean that I do entirely agree with you on Donald Trump. But the interesting and fun fact is that I don't even entirely agree with you on Donald Trump, in the sense that, exactly like I said about Islam, much of what you say is true, and I understand it. But I also think there are other things that should be said to counterbalance that. Now, without going into this political discussion that would take too long, I think I see a relation between the fact that I'm taking two conflicting positions here and the idea of radical centrism. I think, well, I may be wrong about Islam. I may be wrong about Donald Trump. But the fact that I'm saying these things, I believe is a radical centrist attitude. I just don't buy the propaganda of either
Right.
side. I don't buy the propaganda of any side. I want to think
Right.
with my own head.
Well, I am an originator of the propaganda rather than a consumer of it, because I had been writing about Islam from 1988 onward. And
I remember, and especially, how to say, incendiary book of yours,
right,
which was called the Muhammad Code.
Yes, you got it. That's it. But let me explain something about Islam very quickly. And it's that one of the great there's a modernist liberal protest movement within Islam that Islam is very successfully suppressing. And one of the leading figures in that movement points out there are two Islams. There's the Islam when Muhammad was living in his hometown of Mecca. And that's a religion that says, get along, go along to get along. Honor other people of other faiths. But then Muhammad fled. He felt that the Meccans were about to kill him. And so he put his nephew Ali in his bed the night he felt that the killers were about to come, and he fled. And where did he flee to? A town 110 miles away, a town, now you got to understand Mecca. Mecca had a massive religious tourism industry. All the tribes of the Hijaz, basically Saudi Arabia, came to Mecca once a year to make a pilgrimage to the sacred building, the Kaaba, that houses a big black meteoric stone. And they put their gods in the Kaaba along with that stone, and they came to see their gods. So of all the people who came through Mecca and to whom Muhammad preached, the ones who seemed the most tolerant of his belief system were the Jews. So when he fled, he went to a Jewish town, Yathrib. And the people of Yathrib, the Jews, gave him comfort. They housed him. And then he turned against them. You know, you always bite the hand that feeds you. Well, he bit that hand big time. One thing, he started to make a living and acquire followers by going out and raiding Meccan caravans. Now, he knew a great deal about Meccan caravans because his wife was the greatest entrepreneur in all the Hijaz in the camel transport industry. And he, in order to test him, she was 40 years old, he was 25. To test him, she sent him out in charge of a mission to Syria on a camel caravan. So he knew this business, he knew its routes, he knew how much money it carried when it was coming back from Syria. He started raiding camel caravans and killing some of the people in those caravans. The Jews who had hosted him, some of them were outraged. Two poets in particular wrote poetry of outrage against this appalling thing that Muhammad was doing. So one of them was a mother of 5 children who had a baby at her breast. One of Muhammad's men went to her bedside late at night when she was sleeping, removed the baby from her breast, plunged the sword all the way through her to the ground beneath the bedding she was sleeping on. Another critic was supposed to be a 110-year-old Jewish poet, and he also protested against this immoral thing that Muhammad was doing. The same thing happened to him with Muhammad's blessing. And when the guy who'd killed the woman with the baby, the next day he was in a state of serious fear. And he was in serious fear because Muhammad hadn't actually ordered him to kill this woman. And he felt he'd gone off on his own, and now he's going to experience the fires of hell, which Muhammad was constantly preaching about. And he went to Muhammad and said, am I going to hell? Look what I've done. I've killed this woman without your express permission. And Muhammad said, you don't need express permission. You have to take it as basically the default position that if someone is opposed to me, you are completely exonerated for killing that person because you are carrying out the will of the prophet and I am the prophet. What a crazy default position. So Muhammad was very different in his Islam in the town of Yathrib, which he turned into a military dictatorship in which all opposition was killed. And when he came back to Mecca, this time as a military conqueror, than he had been when he was the conciliant soul, the person trying to get along in his hometown of Mecca. So there are two Islams. There's the Islam of getting along with other people and doing good, and there's the Islam of screwing other people, killing other people, and doing bad and going out on conquest. And Muhammad led, he commanded 65 military missions. He personally led 27 of them. He gloried in killing people. He gloried in chopping off people's arms and legs. He loved the sword. He would have, if he'd ever heard the phrase prophet of peace, which is used for Jesus, he would have rebelled against himself because he called himself the prophet of war, and he was proud of that. He conquered something like 115 square kilometers or miles of territory a day. And he was proud of that. So another one of the titles he gave himself was Muhammad the Conqueror. So there are two Islams.
Right. There are two Islams, like there are two forms of capitalism.
And
don't you think exactly the same thing can be said? As we want one good form of capitalism to prevail upon the other, I personally would also want the good form of Islam to prevail upon the bad one.
I've appeared on Iranian and Saudi television over 40 times. The people I've dealt with have been wonderful. They've been warm and charming. They've been friends. However, a cousin of mine was starting a magazine for young Jewish people. And she sent a very, very good journalist to Jordan. This was about 30 years ago. And he was allowed in Jordan. Jews had been afraid when I was living in Israel for 13 months to go into Jordan because they would end up with their ears cut off. They would end up as dead bodies, tossed back across, mutilated, and then tossed back across the border. But he managed to go to Jordan. And he had a minder. And she was with him for 2 weeks. And toward the end of his stay in Jordan, he was dancing with her in a disco. And he said, if the order came out tomorrow to make war against the Jews, what would you do about me? And she said, I would slit your throat. So that's a slight problem. And I had the same experience I was a kid, I was 19 years old. But for some reason, college professors liked me and kept me around like a pet. And one of the things they commented on was the fact that their grad students who had been sent through high school, university with Jewish funding, when they asked their students who they loved and who they thought loved them, what would you do if the call came out for jihad, for war? And they said the same thing. I would slit your throat. Why? It's in the Quran. Slit their throats, basically, cut off their heads, and cut off their fingertips, was what Muhammad said should be done with unbelievers. Muhammad was merciless. He's the cruelest man I've run into in my entire study of history.
Even so, I mean, I was just thinking that unfortunately, I guess you can find similar exhortations to violence, not only in Islam, but also in all the foundational writings of any religion in the world. But that's simply because those foundational doctrinal texts were all written at a time where, unfortunately, we humans were all like that. We were all ready to slaughter the next man at the slightest sign of disagreement.
Well, look at the Old Testament. Saul, the king, was driven.
Yeah, the Bible is also full of that kind of
Oh, it's genocidal. It's genocidal, and I reject it. As a Jew, I reject it, period. It's horrible. It's monstrous. But the Vedas are also chronicles of conquest.
Yes.
And they dehumanize anybody who isn't Brahmin. But the natives of India that the Aryans conquered 1,200 years ago or so, in the Vedas, they dehumanized them. They turned them into demons. They weren't human as far as the Brahmins invading were concerned.
In fact, it is very often heard that contrary to Western religions, Eastern religions are islands of love and peace. But I had done some readings of history, right, and that's just not what history says.
No, it's not true, because you've got armies of Buddhist monks.
Exactly.
Of all things. And you'll find all of this in the Lucifer Principle, my first book, which says that the primary rules of the Lucifer Principle are superorganisms, that is, we come together as groups, and again, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. When we come together in a group, we make a nation, we make a tribe, we make a civilization, we make a self larger than the ingredients in which we are. And superorganisms battle for position in the pecking order of superorganisms. Groups battle for position in the pecking order of groups. That has gone on as long as there have been groups. And there have been groups. Humans can't live without groups. Bacteria can't live without groups. Being in groups is the default for the creatures that nature produces. And the third element of the Holy Trinity of the Lucifer Principle is ideas. Ideas are what groups use to differentiate themselves from other groups. And if you don't have the right idea in your head, you're not human.
Exactly. Unfortunately, we will have to wrap this conversation up in like 10 minutes. But I wanted to discuss more the mathematics of 1 + 1 = 3, but things that happen today in the world are such a powerful magnet that we are always drawn back to them. And of course,
we are humans in the world, citizens of the world.
Yeah, there would be thousands of hours of interesting discussion to be had, right, about all these Muhammad, Islam, Donald Trump, Elon Musk, politics, left wing, right wing, Democrats, MAGA, Republicans, and all that.
Right. Well,
I am interested in the mathematics of 1 + 1 = 3, but I am also interested in these things, which perhaps detract some of my attention from mathematics. But yes, it's all together. But I want to go back to one point.
Okay.
And the point is that, as you very smartly said, that is one of the central points of my last book, Irrational Mechanics, is that we should not make confusion between reality and our mathematical description of reality, because these are two very different things. So I have the impression that many scientists seem to have forgotten that. They seem to think that, okay, our mathematics is reality. Well, my point is that no, our mathematics is not reality. Whatever mathematical system that we can think of to understand reality will never do anything more than scratching the very thin surface of a very thick reality. and there will always be more than there is a Shakespearean thing. There is always be more and more things in heaven and earth that are dreamt of in our mathematics. But having said that, that doesn't mean, of course, that our mathematical description of nature is useless. It just means
it's
that,
not useless at all.
Today we have one, but it's not entirely accurate, so that we will look for a better one, and tomorrow we'll have a better one. And after tomorrow, we will have an even better one. And at some point, perhaps, the mathematics will look so different from what we call mathematics today that perhaps we won't even recognize it as mathematics anymore. I kind of believe that. In fact, in my book, I mention a few ideas that you could not put in a mathematical form unless you are prepared to use a mathematics which is entirely different from today's mathematics. And for example, now I am dedicating a lot of my time to thinking about some of the ideas in my book, like, for example, the idea that the structure of the fabric of the real fabric of reality should be modeled, and not again, I said should be modeled instead of saying simply is, should be modeled in a better way as a fractal space-time instead of a smooth space-time, like that of Einstein's general relativity. And perhaps this fractal nature of space-time could make sense of quantum mechanics in the same context used for general relativity. So to put these two things together, I am dedicating a lot of time to thinking about this, and I can see that the mathematics that would be required to explore this framework would be perhaps not entirely, but significantly different from today's conventional mathematics. And this is just the very first example that we might need different mathematics, but it would be only a little step, because even if I were smart enough to write down this theory, which I'm not, unfortunately, but even if I were smart enough, that would still be a very preliminary thing that would inevitably be superseded by new theories in the future, and so on ad infinitum, so that we will never have the perfect mathematics for the universe, but we might always have better and better and better mathematics. Now, what can you think of when you try to imagine some interesting extensions of today's mathematical physics that are not so different from today's mathematics to be entirely ununderstandable from us, but that would represent an interesting step forward anyway? Would you think of this thermodynamics idea like maximum entropy production, this evolution of the mechanics of non-dissipative systems, something like Prigoghine's idea? What would you think about as an interesting direction?
I hate to use a nasty word. I think that's bullshit.
That's
I think
bullshit.
The whole structure.
Hold on, I said a lot of things. Exactly what is bullshit of this?
The idea of entropy and all the ideas that are derived from it, closed systems, open systems, the whole thing. It's nonsense. It has nothing to do with this universe. It comes from a moment in 1850 where William Thomson, who was a whiz, I mean, he got his first paper on mathematics published when he was 16 years old. with a lot of help from his father, who was a professor of mathematics at the University of God in Scotland. At any rate, he observed there was a fascination with the steam engine. The steam engine for the last 60 years had almost doubled the wages of the average British worker because it had made workers so productive. It was making England rich, it was making England powerful. And so an obsession with the steam engine took off all over Europe. And he was obsessed with the abstract mathematical concept of the steam engine. And he observed in a paper on the mechanical dissipation of energy, a term that he coined, that 80% of the energy generated in a steam engine is lost in friction. And that was the beginning of the end. Because that was the origin of the idea of entropy. And he went on to say,
I've seen that you criticize this concept very much,
right.
but let me lay down by you an interesting idea that is being discussed today. Unfortunately, I mentioned it only very briefly in my book, which is this. On the one hand, you have those who say that the world is simple, and the simple explanation of everything is that entropy always grows. On the other hand, you have something that might seem like an entirely different way of looking at things, which is, as you said, we live in a flamboyant universe where complexity and organization want to grow, not entropy, but organization, not disorganizations, but organization. But some people are saying that perhaps these two apparently incompatible ideas are real expression of the same idea, which is, okay, what the universe wants is for entropy to grow. But then you ask yourself the question, what is the fastest way for entropy to grow? And the answer that some people give to this question is very interesting, which is the fastest way for entropy to grow has to go through the formation of pockets of orders.
Right.
Because those pockets of order are able to dissipate entropy in the rest of the universe faster than other natural processes. So in one sense, disorder wants to grow because the growth of disorder is essential to the growth of order, which is what the universe wants. That's something that also Bobby Azarian says in his books, that the second law of thermodynamics is actually right, but is right as a consequence of the fact that complexity has to grow, and I think these kind of things, and this is also a very preliminary idea that perhaps will have to be studied by new mathematics, and perhaps that new mathematics could be the fractal mathematics that I'm alluding to in another context. But I think it is a nice way to put things together. Have you done any thought about these kind of concepts?
I love Bobby. I think he's a wonderful, wonderful person, even though we disagree about the Middle East profoundly. And we disagree about entropy. He makes entropy a primary plank of his system. I think the whole idea of entropy is ridiculous.
No, he makes it a necessary consequence, not a primary plank.
Right, but it's in there. It's a big deal. And my book spends an equal amount of time on entropy, but it tells you the history of the concept and says the concept doesn't fit this universe. Now, entropy really got its big kick in the 1870s when a mathematician came along and used probability theory to prove entropy. The problem is that probability theory is based on the idea that the most probable thing always happens. The least probable thing always disappears. That's false. That mathematics is false. This is a universe in which the most improbable thing always happens. The reason that this is the case of the sexual cosmos is because sex defies the law of least effort, that nature always takes the shortest path between 2 points. No, sex is the longest path imaginable, and it is such a long path that even PhDs in the field of sexuality, in the field of sexual reproduction, in the field of genetics, cannot entirely remember every single step that's involved in sex. It is incredibly complex. How does a cosmos that always takes the shortest distance between 2 points produce the longest possible, utterly concatenated, utterly combobulated path between 2 points? Why? Because it's the universe of flamboyance. It's not a universe of entropy. Because the least probable thing happens in this cosmos, not the most probable thing, which means the mathematics of probability theory may apply to dividing up a pot in a gambling casino when the game is stopped before it's finished, which is what that was the problem that Pascal was trying to solve and came up with the mathematics of probability. But it doesn't apply in this universe. It may apply in some small isolated cases, but it doesn't apply to the universe as a whole. Everything that's happened from the birth of time and space in the Big Bang to the consolidation of things from time, space, and speed, the quarks we were talking about, and leptons, to the consolidation of atoms 380,000 years later, to the consolidation of massive swirls of matter, massive, we call galaxies today, to the catching fire in giant gravity balls within that larger structure of matter. These things are so improbable that it defies belief. And a math based on probability that says all things are constantly falling apart is the opposite of what this universe is all about. This is a fucking creative cosmos. And the mechanisms of its creativity are what we need to focus on. And we may have to discard the word mechanism, because mechanism refers to the usual metaphor of imagining that the cosmos operates the way our technology operates. It doesn't. Our closest way of approximating the cosmos is going to be in computer simulations, and computer simulations, alas, are highly impenetrable. We know what the rules that started the whole thing are, but we don't know how they come up with the wild, extravagant results. And it isn't just a fractal universe. Fractals play a very important role in my book, The God Problem, that discusses all of this. But fractals make repetitive patterns. And this universe makes repetitive patterns with a difference. And differences don't come into fractals. There are the differences that are created by the repetition of the fractal patterns, but that's it. It's in its own strange way static, not able to go orthogonal. And this universe is a universe of orthogonal leaps. Does that make any sense at all?
It does, and it will make even more sense when I'll have been thinking about this for a week, as I will do. But unfortunately, I'm afraid I should not take more of your time. It's already half an hour past when I said that we would stop. So that
well, you can see that you've got me thinking. You can see that I am pondering these problems that you raised. They are very important problems. And if I can't answer them within the framework of a universe that doesn't follow the second law of thermodynamics, but follows the first law of flamboyance, if I can't at least give the axioms upon which a new mathematical system can be based, I haven't finished my contribution.
Exactly. But you have given the axiom, and let's continue to work on elaborating the full mathematical structure of the idea. I'm afraid it will take centuries, but it's going to be fun. Howard, it was a great pleasure talking to you as usual, and I look forward to seeing you again. Thank you very much for listening.
You give me the time of my life. I have a wonderful time talking to you.